This episode is presented by Mercury, the fintech that simplifies how more than 200,000 businesses operate.
Hello, and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, December 6th. I'm Margaux MacColl, and we're back after taking a break last week. Kirsten's still off, so today I'm here with Devin Coldewey and Anthony Ha. How are you guys? Anthony, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was great. I was in Washington, D.C. with my sister and my mom.
Oh, no way. I'm in D.C.
Oh, how come you guys didn't have Thanksgiving together?
I know.
Why didn't you invite me?
Next Thanksgiving, I'll definitely invite you. But it was great. And I mean, it's great to be back in New York, but I feel like a little bit of the pressure of like the end of year sprint when you realize how little you've gotten done and how quickly people are going to be going on their winter breaks.
Yeah, especially with VCs. I feel like I just know no VCs pick up the phone from like December onward.
Yeah, the year's already over for the VCs.
Yeah. Devin, how was yours?
I'm good. I've spent the night at a haunted Victorian mansion up in Bellingham that belongs to my uncle.
That sounds wonderful.
Devin, the next time I'm in Seattle, you'll have to bring me to this haunted mansion. I don't care if it's Halloween or not.
No, we're going 100%. Come on up.
Well, cool. It's crazy that it's already December. I wanted to let listeners know that we are gearing up for our year in review episode, and we want to know how they would put 2024 in a headline. We will vote on our favorites, and the winner will be featured in the episode title. So tag us at EquityPod. And then moving on to our show today, which I'm very excited about, we are going to get into deals from two AI companies and an update on Service Titan's increasingly strange IPO. Later, we are going to dive into all the VC turnover lately. And then Devin's got a rundown of all the like quirkiest AI stories we've heard this year.
But just this week.
Just this week. Yeah, a lot of AI. And Devin, you were actually starting us off with an AI funding round.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This one was by Marina, who wrote up this thing about how some of the folks who made Android and Stripe, they are looking at the sort of AI agent ecosystem or lack of ecosystem out there. Like all the AI companies are like, oh, agents. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But they don't really do anything yet. And they're making all these big promises. So these guys I don't even know how to like properly say the name of their company because they did one of these weird things where it's /dev/agents. So probably dev agents. But the founder, David Singleton, is from Stripe, and he was previously an Android, like one of the original Android guys. And he's like, look, what's needed is an operating system for all these AI agents to sort of be based in that you can take part in as a business or as a service and make sure that they can interact with your product in a way that's, well documented and makes sense. So honestly, it's not a bad pitch. They know what they're doing. Like they built up Android and Stripe. I don't know if this is really the answer, but certainly investors think so. They gave him $56 million for a seed fund. They got Andy Rubin in the round and Andre Karpathy, Alexander Wang. Who knows if this is really the way forward, but I think that they're probably going to build something valuable, even if it doesn't really shake the foundations of the earth.
I mean, 56 million is a crazy seed round. What are they using that money for?
I don't know. Look, it's probably
seems like a huge seed round.
They were just like, how much money do we need? I don't know, $50 million. Like at this point, if you've been working in Google and Android type organizations, Stripe, like you're used to building big and building a big team and a large, complex roadmap. Like you're not building a minimum viable product. You're like, we are going to go talk to the majors. We're going to build a team of like 100 people before we even launch our beta. We're not screwing around here. This is not hey, we're experimenting in this field. They're like, we are going to build the next major AI-focused operating system, and it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. And this is just the advance cash.
Anthony, what goes through your mind when you hear this pitch?
I think, similar to yours, not just the $56 million for the seed round, but the $500 million valuation for something that, hasn't even been launched yet and is still being built. I think is a sign that it's probably a little harder to get these kinds of elevated valuations for any startup nowadays. But if you are a startup in the right space with the right pedigree, which these guys are, like you can still get $500 million valuation and you still haven't launched your first product yet, which is hypey, bubbly, but also certainly the potential and the team does seem to be there.
Yeah, it's like with Fei-Fei Li's startup, World Labs. They don't have a product. they just demoed their first thing, and then Google literally the next day was like, here's the same thing, but even better. And so it's kind of like, okay, where's the value here? It's very difficult to say. I mean, it's interesting and it's going to be influential, but it's kind of like, is this really going to make money, or are you just throwing money in the AI hole?
It was interesting too that it was Google's growth stage fund at a seed round, especially when Gradient VC is like, Google has like an early stage AI focused fund. So for their growth stage to step in on this is really interesting. And there's a lot more we can say about that, but we are actually going to move on to another AI company, which is a startup that I wrote about this week called Yurts. They raised 40 million to basically try to become the DoD's like AI chatbot. It's a really complicated problem because basically the government has all of this classified information that's very siloed. They want to use AI. They want to have these chatbots that everyone's using right now, but they have a lot of classified data and the bar for an outside vendor is really high. So Yurts is trying to build from the ground up just for the DoD. The interesting thing is that they're actually competing directly with the Pentagon, which is creating its own AI chatbot, which according to internal memos, Bloomberg had a really great piece where employees are basically like, we like don't know what classified information we can give to this chatbot. They don't want to get in trouble. And they actually feel more comfortable using like the Pentagon's own AI chatbot, even though it performs worse. Try to build something for the government. And it's an inherently really, really hard customer. What do you guys think?
I have a very silly point to make first, which is just that our two AI startups that we're talking about had the exact opposite naming strategies, where one, we're like staring at it, it's like highly technical. We're like, how do you even pronounce this?
Yeah.
And Yurts is a company name that I would not have guessed was a defense AI startup in a million years.
It sounds cute. Yurts.
I guess, but it isn't cute. It's the opposite of cute. They're like, oh, we make AI for like the Defense Department. And you're like, oh, what's your company called? It's Yurts. And you're like, why? Why Yurts?
Well, it's like Raytheon changed their name to RTX because I think Raytheon sounded too evil. I don't think that's the real reason.
I mean, like, what is it? Like Black Cube, turned into something else, or Yurts never has to change their name.
Yeah.
It's sort of a friendly name, even though it doesn't sound like a particularly friendly product, unless you work in the Pentagon.
That was the whole pitch. They just showed investors their delightful name and said, give us 40 million.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
So true.
No, I remember hearing from these guys. I think I may have actually passed this pitch to you because I thought you might find it more like up your alley. But it's certainly a valuable space. And yeah, I think that there is a tension between the like private solution is better, but the internal solution is trusted. That's the tension that's going on in the space industry as well right now. In a lot of like government adjacent stuff where they're like, yeah, Black Sky provides us with better data handling for our satellite imagery, but the one we've been using for 10 years is the one we all know and trust as far as our own labyrinthine internal Defense Department processes. So I think that getting into that is a dangerous proposition as far as actually making money and surviving that initial thing. But, give it a shot.
Yeah, that's what I talked to the founder, Ben Van Roo, about. Was he was like, you have all these AI companies that want you to, they work with newer systems or they're building newer systems. And he was like, the problem is that the government is very slow and they work on these old legacy systems. And he wants to create something that he can just go and plug into really kind of outdated systems and have it just work and provide that AI value. Cool. We're going to briefly move on from AI. We'll actually be back to talking about it later, but now we're going to revisit ServiceTitan's IPO, which we talked about a few weeks ago. Anthony, you've got an update for us.
Right. So you discussed this on a previous episode that it was already kind of becoming clear that ServiceTitan's IPO was a little bit unusual. They had sort of what not formally or officially, but unofficially is called a kind of dirty term sheet where it was kind of becoming clear that there are some unusual, not particularly favorable to the company terms in their previous funding round. And now ServiceTitan has also announced that their initial price range for the IPO, which is $52 to $57 a share, which is not necessarily the most interesting thing. I think what actually kind of caught people's attention is also that they're going to be using a lot of the money that they raised from their IPO to buy back a lot of stock from the existing investors. And so what that means is that when we think about an IPO, especially for like a tech startup, a lot of times we think of it as like, oh, wow, you're sort of like opening the floodgates. I mean, obviously it's maybe some people are going to get rich, but also we're opening the floodgates. This company is now a big company, is going to be really well capitalized. And in this case, that might not necessarily be the case. This might actually be a situation where instead the company is like, kind of cleaning up its cap table, and it'll use some of the money to invest in the business, but not necessarily a huge majority of it.
This was so interesting to look into. I think the big question is, how many other companies signed deals like this that we don't know about? Do you think that this is kind of a sign of IPOs to come?
I think so, in the sense that, the last couple of years, and this may come up again when we talk about VC firms, is the last couple of years have been kind of tough for startups fundraising, and particularly for startups that maybe raised money at huge valuations in 2020, 2021, and then needed to raise again in 2022 or 2023. Especially if they didn't want it to be a down round, they may have had to take other terms. And that's kind of put them in this awkward position now where there are a lot of different investors who have different terms and different interests. And it means that they're just in a really tough situation. And an IPO, instead of being necessarily this moment of triumph, is more like a necessity. And hopefully it can clean up their finances.
Yeah. And then I feel like the question we keep returning back to on this podcast, which is, when will the IPO market pick back up? And considering this is such a weird IPO, and I do feel like we can use this as a sign that there's going to be, more IPOs, or is this kind of an exception because of how weird it is?
My suspicion is that you're going to see maybe other IPOs similar to this one, not necessarily identical terms, but again, companies that just need liquidity, are getting a lot of pressure to be on the public markets, but they're not necessarily going to be IPOs where everyone's high-fiving each other. Maybe if anything, it's sort of like a kind of sigh of relief of like, okay, that went okay. So I think when people talk about the market opening again, it's really about these kind of big, successful companies coming out, making people a lot of money, potentially funding the next wave of startups. I get the sense that's not what this is a part of. This is going to be sort of there might be a trickle of other IPOs like this, but not kind of the floodgates opening.
An IPO is a sigh of relief. That's kind of sad. Anyway, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about all the crazy VC musical chairs that have been going on, which I think, fingers crossed, is going to touch on my favorite topic, which is Silicon Valley libertarians. And then, in case you were wondering if we were going to talk more about AI, we are. We have another fun AI segment by Devin after the break.
It's time banking did more than hold your money. Now it can. With Mercury, you can pay bills in seconds, close the books faster, and even send invoices. Not only does Mercury do away with a patchwork of tools, it eliminates guesswork, giving you complete and accurate visibility into your business finances, all from one account. Apply in minutes at mercury.com.
This week, there's big news in the venture world, which is that Brian Singerman is taking a step back from Founders Fund. He's been there for 16 years. This is a big deal. It's a big deal in part, too, because Founders Fund already had a huge departure earlier this year. In January, Keith Raboy left to go back to Coastal Ventures. And it's also surprising to me because in conversations I've had with people in the industry, Brian was very much talked about like a big leader of the firm, especially after Keith's departure. But him leaving, Keith leaving, is very much in line with a trend I've been noticing this year, which is that a lot of VCs at major firms are leaving, are switching things up. You have Shareem Krishnan, who is reportedly leaving A16Z to join Elon's Doge. You have Michelle Voles, who I followed really closely because she does American Dynamism at A16Z, is apparently leaving to start her own fund. We actually have a great piece on the website from my colleague, Rebecca, who has been cataloging all these departures. The ones that I chose to highlight, there have been a bunch more, obviously kind of have the common thread that I'm interested in, which is that A16Z and Founders Fund are deeply linked to the upcoming administration. So there is a lot to unpack. How are you guys thinking about these departures?
I think it is the convergence of a few different things. One is certainly that I think there's probably, opportunities for VCs, especially if you're a right-leaning libertarian VC in the upcoming administration. I think the other is that, again, it's been, a rough few years for the VC business. So, being a partner at a VC firm is not necessarily as rewarding financially, intellectually as it has been in the past. So it's funny because, he, in Brian Singerman's case, he said he was leaving for better work-life balance, which seems so euphemistic. And you're like, well, that's obvious BS. But then when I saw that he'd been there for 16 years and I thought about the last few years in the VC business, I'm like, oh, maybe actually it is somebody who's just like, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm just going to take some time off. I don't have any inside information there, but it actually seems like a time where that's not a crazy idea, but it also is not crazy to think that maybe he'll, announce that he's at another firm or in the, Trump administration in a few months.
He needs more work in his work-life balance. He's got too much life going on. He's like, I have had 3 beautiful children, and they are taking up way too much of my time, so I'll be taking on a much more intense job.
No, it's a really interesting time, though, to leave Founders Fund in particular, because, I mean, Peter Thiel was super supportive of JD Vance's political beginnings. They're very close with Elon and Doge.
Oh, yeah. That entire gambit has just completely landed 100%. But my own personal feelings about, like Doge and the new administration and stuff aside, this transition period, like all presidential transitions between administrations, especially administrations of different parties, represent a natural break point for many industries. And it's a perfectly good point to say, like, you know what? Now is a good time for me to go do something else. This is a good time to take stock, especially because there are like 100% guaranteed big changes coming down the line. Whether those changes you perceive as positive or negative or disruptive or consolidating or whatever, probably people have been planning these moves. They probably were planning what they were going to do depending on the administration, depending on how the economy goes. But I think that this is probably a lot of people's own little gambits, sort of finding the natural time to execute.
Something else I was thinking about with A16Z was like, if this is something we're going to see as these funds become mega funds, and like with Shireen leaving, with Michelle leaving, maybe it's just not a shoe-in. Like it used to be, I feel like if you landed at A16Z, you'd maybe stay there for your whole career because like you're at the top, like congrats, but it's a mega fund, right? Like it's huge. They sent Shireen to London. He opened up their London offices, which, maybe is not how he saw his life going. And with Michelle, this idea that starting like a $50 million fund might be more valuable experience than being at the biggest American dynamism-ish fund, I think is interesting. Like, I wonder if you're going to see a lot more turnover at, the General Catalysts, Sequoias, and Andreessens of the world, just because of how big they are now.
Shriram is also an interesting case because obviously he's had this whole podcast career on the side too. And so it was also interesting to see that he was going to Doge, because I would have assumed that if he left, he was just going to go full time, on the podcast. But I think it also just suggested that maybe he had other interests that sort of were kind of taking him out and away from A16Z, which again, I think probably, especially at a firm of that size, there can be just a lot of politics about who actually has real check writing power, how many checks you can write. And so at a big firm like that, it's not surprising to me that you might be able to stay there, but there's not necessarily as much opportunity to invest and to lead as you'd hoped. And so you start looking for opportunities elsewhere.
No, for sure.
I wish more people would retire. Like, I just, you make so much money. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars in your personal funds. You wield power, but you're still in meetings all day. You still have a boss. Maybe it's somebody like Ben Horowitz or something like that, who's like telling you like, no, we're doing this, not this. And you're like, man, I am worth $500 million. I want to do what I want to do. Like, I would retire so fast and buy an island and just go there with my family and like get a bunch of dogs and make a dog shelter or something like that. It's like, you can live your dreams. Are your dreams sitting in a conference room hearing the same pitches you were hearing about AI like 5 years ago? Like, a lot of people really love it, I guess. But I just am surprised that we don't see more longtime people and like people who have become rich and powerful just retiring and being like, you know what, I'm out. I got mine. I'm going to go retire.
I agree. I covered a talk that Palmer Luckey gave, and he like addressed this in a very Palmer Luckey way, where he was like, you'd think that I would retire after, making $1 billion, but like people like me were like pirates always looking for like the next fortune. Like we want more. And I mean, he was just describing like greed, basically.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I was like, that's not really unique to pirates. Like it's a very common thing.
I will say that there are VCs who are not the like Mark Andreessens or Palmer Luckeys of the world who don't yet have $500 million or $1 billion, and
of course,
who, I think have what we would think of as a lot of money, but, maybe do feel like there's still more money to be made before they can sort of comfortably retire.
Well, what do we think Doge is going to play? Like, I don't think Doge is going to be
No, I think I'm actually going to enjoy watching that play out, I think, but we don't have to go into that.
Without getting super political, I will say that I do think it's going to be an interesting laboratory for people who say government should be run like a startup or run like a business.
Yeah.
We're going to see whether or not that's a good thing.
I think we're going to find out that a lot of businesses are not very well run.
This is good. That was a really good sort of spooky quote to end that section on. So thank you, Anthony. We are going to actually end on a lighter note, which is Devin is going to take us through some of the sort of like weird AI stories that have happened this week. Go for it.
I mean, it's not like there's just been a ton of weird or spooky, AI stuff. But so I think a lot of our readers may have, or listeners, I should say, heard about this David Mayer thing that, like, if you type this guy's name into ChatGPT or ask ChatGPT to write it out or whatever, it would just crash. It would say, I cannot provide an answer. And everybody was like, why? This is so weird. And it worked. It was like a magic spell that killed ChatGPT. And millions of people did it. So we looked into it, and a lot of people looked into it, I should say, and they came up with a list. And the list had Jonathan Turley, who's a Fox commentator, Brian Hood, who is a mayor from Australia, Jonathan Zittrain, David Faber, and Guido Scorza. All these people who you're like, who are these people? But we started looking into it, and I remembered Brian Hood because I wrote about him last year. He was a mayor who had said, like, hey, I think it was Google's chatbot or whatever, like AI, is giving incorrect information about me, and it amounts to basically libel, because it was saying that he did a crime when in fact he reported the crime, and he was like, I'm going to sue you unless you can correct this information. And I was like, I don't think that's a coincidence. And these other guys, like I think Jonathan Zittrain is a scholar about right to be forgotten, and I was like, okay, so there's a thread running through these people. These are people who either have some reason to want to not be in ChatGPT or not be on the net in some way. There's a privacy thing. And it turns out the name David Mayer, this was a poor guy, a professor of drama who was having trouble going between the UK and America because a terrorist used his name as his pseudonym when doing terrorist stuff. So he was for years trying to get his name cleared online and in all kinds of diplomatic systems and whatever. And he died recently, never solved the problem that I know of. But it was like, oh, so this is definitely that kind of thing. And it turns out OpenAI finally confirmed to us that this was some sort of privacy tool internally that had gone rogue and was basically breaking ChatGPT. And it's like, this was all just a big reminder that these systems are not some magical intelligence. It's just a bunch of weird software tied to statistical text prediction systems. And it breaks in dumb ways all the time.
So interesting. And my question is, how do I get my name? Like, is there a way to be one of these people that ChatGPT can't give you any information on them?
I don't know. There are various official programs like the right to be forgotten. There's some stuff with the GDPR, but not all this stuff is very voluntary. There are very few authorities, although Guido Scorza is on the Italian Data Protection Authority board. So I think that's why he was on this list. He may have requested this or whatever. But there's no sort of central location where you can say hey, ChatGPT, don't, give out personal information about me. Because there's also the question of what is in the public domain. What is publicly available? What is public domain? If there's a Wikipedia article about you, why should ChatGPT not cite that and say, oh, Margaux MacColl is this reporter. She's done this and this. I wish that there was a way, because I would sign up right away. And I sign up for all the data
same.
deletion stuff I can. But I was surprised, actually, that ChatGPT and OpenAI were respecting these. I don't know exactly how it works, but I was surprised that they had it to begin with.
Anthony, what are you thinking about with this AI weirdness?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest point is just underlining what Devin said, right? Which is that these models are subject to a lot of the same kind of rules and flukes and things like that a search engine is. I'm also wondering about, I guess, thinking about, again, not just these legal sort of right to be forgotten things, but these kind of broader ecosystem of online reputation. And 15 years ago, we had this whole wave of companies like Reputation Defender, which I think is now reputation.com or something like that, where it's less about withholding information, but more just burying bad news and good news, essentially, is my understanding of how they worked, and wondering how that kind of thing works in a sort of more AI and generative AI centric world. SEO, as we think of it now, I think doesn't apply, but there will be sort of ways to try to hack the system so that when somebody looks you up, which was, certainly the first thing I did on ChatGPT was to look myself up,
Same.
and then you start thinking about how can I influence those results? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I should figure that out. But I think that's something a lot of people are going to be thinking about.
I'm just not a self-Googler. I don't know why, but I probably should do that.
How are you guys thinking about, there are other stories that we have on the website about OpenAI right now, which is they're having like 12 days of shipments. So they're like shipping features. And like reportedly, we're going to finally get Sora, which is exciting. And they also just hired their first marketing chief from Coinbase, which is interesting because they've gotten so many users with zero marketing spend. How are you guys thinking about this like next chapter of OpenAI?
This is one of the, not exactly weird, but this is something that is kind of unique to the new AI era, is that these companies are just throwing features out there. They throw them out there on Twitter. They announce them rapid fire. Perplexity is the worst. Arvind just goes on Twitter and is like, we do this now. And you're like, in what way? For who? How much does it cost? Who are you partnering with? What's the data behind that? And they're like, well, guess we'll find out. Or maybe we'll just kill it later. So OpenAI is doing this like 12 days of shipments, which to me, they've probably been saving up a bunch of stuff that they were going to have at like some big events. And then they decided not to. And then The Verge kind of scooped them on some of this stuff, which they strenuously denied, as did an investor talking about, it was reported that they're going to increase the price of ChatGPT by like 10x. And he was like, absolutely not. Lo and behold, here's the ChatGPT Pro plan for $200 a month, 10 times the normal price. It is a different product, but it's like, obviously they are looking at a higher tier of service here, whether that's worthwhile or not, we'll see. But that's probably how you'll get early access to Sora, which is the video generation thing that I don't really know what an ordinary like ChatGPT Pro type user would use Sora for. Every filmmaker, every editor, every like person in media to me is like, we would not use that except in like very offline pre-production concept stuff. And I don't know why you would use OpenAI's version versus one of the other like 5 or 10 things. But that's the AI like advertising thing. They just throw it out there and hope it sticks. And in fact, I just want to say you should go and read Max Zeff's piece on AI ads, not AI generated ads, but ads about AI, because they are another weird thing. They totally missed the mark. They're written like an alien observing human society and being like, we can automate that interaction between, father and his beloved daughter. Like, you don't need to spend time doing that. So that's a wonderful little piece that Max did. You should definitely check that out.
Max's piece was great. I was a little mad reading it because I had wanted to write something similar, but he did it first and he did it better than I would have.
It's really good. It's a great piece.
And I think it does speak to, obviously, like, you were saying earlier, there's been this tremendous interest in these products, especially ChatGPT with no marketing. And so maybe on some level, they don't need to get the marketing right. Maybe all these bad ads don't ultimately have an impact. But I could also imagine a scenario where there has been this huge rush, but now we're getting to the point of like, oh, are people going to keep using these products? Is this actually going to continue spreading into more crucial activities? And if they kind of can't get their story straight and can't sell an actually appealing vision of human life with AI, it might sort of have a natural cap or plateau.
And with that, we are out of time. But before I say bye to everyone, my producer let me know that I was mispronouncing Shrurum's name. Shrurum, I'm sorry. I've chatted with you before. You're lovely. I apologize for mispronouncing your name. So thank you, Anthony and Devin. Appreciate you guys jumping on and chatting with me.
Thanks for having me as a guest.
Always happy to pop on.
Equity will be back next week. But until then, you can find Equity under the handle @EquityPod on X and Threads. Thanks for listening.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.